Hello, my name is Zhenya. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be discussing all of the books that I read in 2024, but we're going to be doing it in a tier ranking style. So I'm going to go pretty quickly, or at least I hope that it'll be quickly, through all the books that I read. I'm not going to go super in depth about the plots of the books, so if you're interested based on my opinion on them, you will have to look that up on your own, or this video would be super long. Before we get into the tier ranking though, I want to go through some of my stats from the year, because this will be the only video where I talk about all of my books from the previous year, because I am kind of ready to move on to my 2025 reads and just start fresh with the year. But I felt like I kind of owed it to you guys to talk about all the books that I read, mostly because I started this channel towards the end of 2024. So a lot of the books that we're going to be discussing today, you may not have known that I read them and you never heard my opinion, unless you follow me on maybe Goodreads. But yes, let's get into the stats really quick. So this year I read 84 books. That was 33,254 pages. So you can kind of tell from that number, I did try and read some larger books this year, which really contributed to it. I guess I mean last year. A big overview of the genres that I read this year were romance and literary. Those were like the top genres that I read. But I also read some contemporary, fantasy, and a decent number of classics. I'll also put on the screen a big summary of all the genres that I read, and this data is from StoryGraph, so they go pretty in depth with it, but I'm not going to bore you by running through all of those. In 2024, my average rating was 4.07 stars. So overall, you can tell that I had a pretty good reading year. I didn't have a ton of flops, and I enjoyed what I was reading for the most part. I only DNF'd one book this year, so I'm not going to include that in the tier ranking video, but I will mention it here now. It was Does It Hurt by H.D. Carlton. This is a dark romance. I picked it up because it had to do with sharks, but it was just too much for me. It felt unnecessary, and I don't think dark romance is a genre that I necessarily want to continue reading. My average time to finish a book was 9 days, apparently, and I'll put on the screen the different moods that I like to read this year and the pacing of my books. I'll also put on the screen kind of a representation of page numbers that I read this year, and you can also see that I read mostly fiction books, but I did have some nonfiction throughout 2024. That's enough stats for now, so let's get into the tier ranking portion of this video. Here's the tier list that I made. I'm going to go through all of the levels and kind of explain what I'm going for with each of them. So we'll go from the bottom up. This first one, Kindly Wipe It From My Memory. I don't want to remember that I read this book. Like, no hate to the authors or anything, but just I don't want to think about it. Next is Thanks But No Thanks. Like, I get what the author was going for. I see how it could be important, but I just didn't really care for it. Next is Would Recommend, but not really a favorite. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. Those are kind of like my 3-star reads for the most part. Next one is Glad I Read This. These are mostly like 4-star reads or books that just I'm happy that I read. Then we have Swoon, which is like more towards the 4.5, the 5-star reads. Those are books that made me really happy, probably my favorites of the year. And then finally, Lives in My Head Rent-Free. Those are my all-time favorites. I will probably be thinking about them for a long time, and they have left a lasting impact on me. So none of these books that I have listed here are in a particular order. It's just random, so it's not going sequentially throughout the year, January through December. So let's get into it. Starting off strong, we have Wuthering Heights. We're starting off strong, guys. This one lives in my head rent-free. Absolutely love this book. I think about it so often. I cannot wait to reread it this year, and it is a good one. This is by Emily Bronte, by the way. They're all square images, so sadly some of the authors have been cut off, so I'm going to try my best to make sure I say the authors for all of them. Ooh, next we have Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I really liked this book. I had it on my shelf for a long time. I had a really great time reading it, and honestly, I'm just gonna say that I'm glad that I read this. Next we have These Silent Woods by Kimmy Cunningham Grant, I believe. I read this in October. It was perfect for like getting into spooky season. I think I read this in October. Oh, I was surprised by this book. It wasn't really what I was expecting, but I ended up really enjoying it. I'd put it under Would Recommend, but not a favorite. Yeah, speaks for itself. Okay, next we have The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I liked this book. I feel like it kind of left me disappointed, but it's not quite at Thanks But No Thanks. So I'm gonna put it under Would Recommend, but not a favorite. Okay, then we have The Silk Roads. This is a new history of the world. It talked about the Silk Roads, the history behind it, but it went more in depth than you would get from a class or a video, and I really enjoyed it. I feel like the book itself was well written, so I would recommend it for that reason. At times it definitely felt a bit textbooky, even though I think the whole point of it was that it wasn't supposed to be textbooky. I'm gonna put it under would recommend, but not a favorite, because I think if you really like history, you would like this, but I don't think I'd read it again. I also think I could have got this information from somewhere else instead of reading a super long book about it, but that's just me. Next we have The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Oh, I really like this book. I think that overall I like the book more than the movie, but the movie is what's the nostalgia of it for me. However, I think that the writing in this was so good. Stephen Chbosky did a great job depicting Charlie and his emotions, and I felt very drawn to him as a character. I'm gonna put it under, it's between these two. I'm gonna say glad I read this, because when I think about it, I'm not really swooning. Not gonna lie. Okay, next. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. This was the year, or this 2024 was the year that I reread the Harry Potter series. Not all of them, I still have 2 that I need to read, but Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, oh. I think that this is going to go under swoon, because it's so cozy, it gives me nostalgic vibes. It's not necessarily the best in the series in my opinion, but there's just something about it. Let's just do the whole Harry Potter series now, guys. Let's get those out of the way. Okay, so we got the Chamber of Secrets. Putting this under, glad I read this. I think it's important in the series. It's not my favorite in the series, but it's not bad. I wouldn't put it under this tier right here, so that one's good. Prisoner of Azkaban, guys, lives in my head rent-free. This is my favorite in the series. I think that it's everyone's favorite in the series. Okay, not everyone, but a lot of people. So that one definitely goes up there. Next in the Harry Potter series is The Goblet of Fire. This one was really good. I'm glad that I reread it because I have a newfound appreciation for it, reading it as an adult. And honestly, same thing goes for The Order of the Phoenix. This one was always my least favorite, but I got so much more of the lore out of it this reread, so definitely putting it under glad that I read this. Okay, next we have The Stranger by Albert Camus. Guys, I really liked this book, but also at the same time, I didn't. I'm glad that I finally read it, but I overall, this one's tough for me. It's definitely between these two. I'm putting it under would recommend, but not a favorite. I think that it was a great exploration of human emotions and existentialism, but overall, it wasn't my favorite. It was kind of sad, and I think there are better classics out there. Oh, next we have The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Putting it under swoon. I'm sorry, I love this book. Highly recommend it. If you've been thinking about reading it, please go read it. This is the kind of book that's like kind of torture to read in a way, but it's also necessary at the same time. Next we have The Spare Man by Mary Robinette Kowal, I believe. Putting this under would recommend, but not a favorite. It's not quite at thanks but no thanks, but it's getting there. It's close. My friend lent this to me and I'm really glad that I read it. The female main character was really wonderful. She was super funny and very headstrong, and I loved that about her, but overall I didn't really care about the story at all. Oh my gosh. Next is Tales of the Weird. This was an uncanny introduction. This is by various authors, guys. This is a lot of short stories. They're British, they're old. Kindly wipe it from my memory. I did not like these, and that's all I have to say about it. Ooh, The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern. I really liked this book. I think about it a lot. It wasn't necessarily a masterpiece, but it's one of the books that, like, if I think back on 2024, it's definitely a standout. This is by Linda Cohen Leugman. I'm putting this under swoon, guys. I would recommend this. It is a great story that's told from an older person's point of view for part of it, and I feel like I don't see that a lot, so I really appreciated that. Definitely putting that under swoon. Ooh, next. Okay, wait, I'm gonna do the whole Magnolia Park series in order, just like I did for Harry Potter. In 2024, I read the entire series. I think that I started Magnolia Parks, this first one, on my birthday, on January 1st, and that was such a great way to start the year. This first one lives in my head rent-free. There's something about it. Obviously, it's the first in the series, but you get to know the characters so well. You quickly fall in love with most of them, and it was really an addicting read. I liked it enough to obviously read the rest of the series, and I think about the first one a lot. So then next, I will do the first Daisy Hates. This may be an unpopular opinion. I'm not really a Daisy girl. I am putting this under glad I read this. Obviously, it's important in the series. It sets up Daisy Hates and her world and her point of view, and I really like how you're getting different points of view from the previous book. Not my favorite out of the whole Magnolia Parks universe. Next we have Magnolia Parks The Long Way Home. I'm putting this under swoon. This book, it was really tough to read, but it was necessary, and I remember when I finished this book, it was tragic. I was in jury duty, guys. I was really struggling to keep it together. Daisy Hates The Great Undoing also goes under swoon. I love this book. There's not much to say about it. It makes me swoon when I think about it. Amazing, amazing quotes. Honestly, I just want to go back and underline everything. Jessa Hastings delivered on this one. And then finally, we have Magnolia Parks Into the Dark, the final installation in Magnolia's series of the books. This goes in this tier. It lives in my head rent-free. It was the perfect way to wrap everything up. I loved it. Okay, I feel like we're not moving fast enough. Next we have The Little Liar by Mitch Albom. This book surprised me. I did not expect to like it as much as I did. I'm putting it under swoon. It was a 5-star read for me, guys. I wouldn't say necessarily swoon when I think about it, but it's definitely higher than glad that I read this. It is about a little boy during the Holocaust, so it is a little bit darker, but it's so good. And with the World War II theme, I guess, we have The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. Swoon. I love Kristen Hanna's writing. This book was tragic. I really felt like I was there, and also a 5-star read. Next we have The Housemaid by Frida McFadden. Guys, thanks but no thanks. I liked it initially when I read it, but every time that I think about it, it's just kind of meh. I'm gonna watch the movie when it comes out because I love Sydney Sweeney, but I don't think I'll read any others in the Housemaid series. I will potentially read other books by Frida McFadden though. I'll give her another shot. Next we have The Bullet Swallower by Elizabeth Gonzalez James. I liked this book. I'm glad that I read it. I actually listened to it as an audiobook and I wish that I physically read it because I think I would have got more out of it. But overall, glad that I read it. Yeehaw, very cowboy, western. It was a good time. Ooh, This Could Be Us. Guys, this book hit. It was a great read during the summer. I actually read a lot of it during an overnight layover in Atlanta, which is where it's set. It's in Atlanta, Georgia, I believe. And I also finished it when I was getting a big old tattoo on my leg. So I was reading some painful parts of the book while in pain, and that was definitely an experience. Definitely, ooh. Okay, I'm putting this under glad that I read this because I liked the first book in the series, Before I Let Go, more than this one. I don't quite swoon when I think about this one, but I did really love it. And I didn't say this, but This Could Be Us is by Kennedy Ryan. Apologies if I'm forgetting to say the author's names. They're cut off, so it's hard for me to remember. Next we have Art of War by Sun Tzu. Putting this under would recommend, but not a favorite. I feel like there were some insightful quotes in this one, and I can see why it's popular, but it's not quite for me. However, it is higher than Thanks, but no thanks. Next is Stolen Focus by Johann Hari, I believe. This is a nonfiction book about why you can't pay attention. It had a lot to do with media and overconsumption, and overall, I am very glad that I read this. I got a lot out of it, and I thought that it was a good nonfiction book. Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This goes under swoon, guys. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'm really excited to read the next book in the series. The characters are so amazing. I honestly want to reread Six of Crows again before I read Crooked Kingdom, because I think that I'll fall even more in love with the characters. Next is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I read this at the beginning of the year, but I still think about it so much. It was a 5-star read, and I had an amazing time reading it, and I recommend it to a lot of people. I'm going to put this under swoon. Oh my gosh, guys, Migrations by Charlotte McGonaghy. I just talked about this in my previous video, I believe. What a beautiful book. This lives in my head rent-free. I need to go and buy the physical copy so I can read it again and annotate it. It was beautiful. I think it was so necessary, and it really rekindled my love for the planet. People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. Glad that I read this. I had a good time. I think this was my 3rd Emily Henry book that I've ever read, and it wasn't at the very top, but I had a good time reading it, honestly. Next is Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This is a thriller mystery. It was very twisty and turny, and at times it blew my mind, but honestly, it's not really a favorite of mine. I'm gonna put it under would recommend, but not a favorite. Next is Dan Brown, Origin. This is by the same author who wrote The Da Vinci Code. My dad gave me this book, so I read it out of courtesy to him. I don't think I'd pick up another book like this, but it was pretty good. It's just, okay, I would recommend it. Would I? Sorry, I would recommend it, but it's not a favorite of mine. This is a fiction that discusses a lot about science and religion, and overall I think it's a necessary read, but it just didn't really hit for me. Oh, next is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. Maybe this is a controversial take, I don't know, but kindly wipe it from my memory. I love Ali Hazelwood, but this book did not hit for me this year. I was very sad. I was disappointed, that's for sure. Next we have Second Tide's The Charm by Chandra Bloomberg. I love this book. This was a really highly rated book for me for a romance, which was kind of surprising. So I'm putting this under swoon, guys. I would really recommend this book. I thought it was such a fun read. Obviously it's a second chance romance, which you can tell from the title. If you like romance and you like sharks or water or biology, or the beach, or anything along those lines, I would highly recommend this book because those are some very prominent points throughout the story, and overall, I just really enjoyed it. Next we have Naja by Jean-Paul Sartres. I don't know how to say his last name, still don't, but I am glad that I read this book, I think. Was I? Yes, I'm glad that I read this book. I got a lot out of it. It wasn't necessarily a favorite of mine, but I feel like it was an important read for me at the time, and it went along well with The Stranger by Albert Camus. Next is The Grid by Gretchen Baki, and this is all about the electric grid and how it came to be, how it works, and kind of the future of it. I read this for a class in college, but I'm really glad that I read this. I learned a lot, and I would definitely recommend it if you're looking for a nonfiction along those realms of things. It was very educational, and I actually highlighted a lot. Next is Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. This is about the Assange murders and kind of the birth of the FBI, and I read it because there was a movie that was coming out and I really wanted to watch the movie, which I still have not watched, but I did not like this book, which, okay, my heart goes out to all that were murdered, of course. But I didn't like the book. I thought it was pretty boring. I'm gonna put it under thanks but no thanks, because I need to remember this. I need to remember what happened. I need the history, but I also don't really want to think about it. So yeah, that's my rating for that one. Next is The Ministry of Time by Kellyanne Bradley. I needed to make another tier, I think. I should have made one that was like right book, wrong time, because I think that I could have really liked this book, but it didn't really hit for me at the time that I read it. I think my current stance on it is would recommend but not a favorite, because I would definitely recommend this book. I thought that the writing was beautiful, but it didn't really work for me, and I think it could have been the headspace that I was in at the time. Ooh, next is Let the Great World Spin by Colin McCann. I liked this book. I had a really good time reading it. I got this from my friend for Christmas, and I'm so glad that I read it. Just gotta say, it's a wonderful story about all these interconnected people in New York. I think it's a really great literary fiction book. Next is Misery by Stephen King. I would put this under would recommend but not a favorite. I talked about this in one of my previous videos. I think that Stephen King is a mid author for me. His books don't hit that often, but I'm glad that I read it. It wasn't really a favorite of mine though, but I think that a lot of people would really like it. Next is the Book of Mental Toughness Mantras by Chris Dorris, I believe. This book, on all of my book tracking apps, it said like nobody shelved this book this year, or like 2 people shelved this book. So this is a very unique book, but I thought it was really good. My friend got this for me, and I am glad that I read this. Oh no, I'm running out of room. What do I do? Okay, I don't know. Next is Mary, An Awakening of Terror by Nat Cassidy. I thought this was a really good book, and I've actually been thinking about it a lot lately. I think before I would have put it under would recommend but not a favorite, but I think it's getting up there, guys. This was a spooky book. It had me squirming at times, and I definitely would recommend this if you like horror, because this was a good horror book. So I'm putting this under glad that I read this. Next we have a reread. This was Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. I reread this for a book club. This used to be a swoon for me, but I don't think about it that much, honestly, and I think it's kind of gone down to glad that I read this. This is definitely my second favorite Ali Hazelwood book, so it's up there. Next is Invisible Women by Carolyn Perez, I believe. This was an amazing book. It's all about data bias and how gender is very unequal when it comes to data. I think that everyone should read this book. I think about this so much, and I think about all the data gaps when it comes to gender all the time. It absolutely sucks, but this knowledge is so necessary, and I'm glad that this book exists. I'm putting it under swoon. Next is Letters from Father Christmas by J.R.R. Tolkien. He wrote The Lord of the Rings, which is the reason I picked this book up. I think the story was absolutely amazing, and J.R.R. Tolkien actually wrote all of these lovely letters for his children throughout the years, and the book kind of just published them, and he had this amazing handwriting. There were so many wonderful pictures, and I think that what he did for his kids was so amazing. I am glad that I read this. Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. This is up there with some of my favorite romances of all time. I was laughing out loud on the plane when I read this. The people next to me were kind of giving me the death glare. I have no apologies though. This book was really good. I'm putting it under glad that I read this. It's not quite a swoon for me. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Lives in my head, rent-free. I get choked up when I think about this book. I want to reread it again. I think that everyone should read this. One of my favorite classics of all time. Honestly, 10 out of 10, no notes. Okay, next is Nothing Like the Movies by Lynn Painter. Kindly wipe it from my memory. I have a few videos where I talk about this book, but it doesn't need to exist in my opinion. Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. I love this book. I had a really good time reading it. I'm glad that I have been continuing the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, so I'm putting this under glad that I read this. Next is Love Unwritten by Lauren Asher. This is the second book in, I think, the Lakefront Billionaires series. I like this book. I think it was higher than other romances that I've read, and I'm going to put it under glad that I read this. It was really long, but it worked. I thought it was good. I really liked the couple. I loved the music representation, and yeah, no complaints for this one. James by Percival Everett. I read this at the end of December, I believe, so I didn't talk about it on my channel. I left a lengthy review on my Goodreads if you want to check that out. I thought this book was so amazing. It was a little bit short of a 5-star for me, but it was really high up there, and I've been thinking about this book a lot. So I'm putting it under Swoon. I think that it really deserved the nomination of Barnes & Noble Book of the Year. I think that everyone should read this book. Everyone. Next is The Electric Kingdom by David Arnold. This is a young adult sci-fi book, and I think I talked about this in my previous video. I read it only because I got it in a blind date with a book. I didn't really like it. I wouldn't gravitate to other books in this realm of things. I don't want to forget it though, because I want to remember that I don't want to read other books like this. So I'm going to put it under thanks, but no thanks. Ooh, Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austen. I had fun reading this book, but honestly, I have not thought about it once since I read it. I'm going to put this under would recommend, but not a favorite. It was pretty funny, and I liked the overall premise of it, but I kind of did not like the female main character, and she was like the main part of the book. So, yeah. Roll Winter with You by Ali Hazelwood. I read this in December. This was the shortest book I've read this year, potentially. Really, really short. And, poor Ali Hazelwood. She's not getting my votes today. Thanks, but no thanks. It was okay. It didn't need to exist. And honestly, the main guy was really creepy. So, yeah. How to End a Love Story by Yuling Kwang. I really like this book. I actually think about it a lot, and I think about some of the quotes in it. It wasn't a favorite of mine, but overall I am really glad that I read this. Next is How Infrastructure Works by Deb Chakra. I love this book. I feel like it's an important book for a lot of people to read to get an idea of how systems that are all around us really work and some of the engineering behind them and why they're so important. I got a lot of really knowledgeable information out of this, even though I did know a lot of it from my degree. But I'm glad that I read this, and if you have any interest in this topic, I would recommend checking it out. Oh my goodness. Next, Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. Not a lot to say about this one. This one lives in my head rent-free. I've been thinking about it so much lately. Definitely one of my top reads of the entire year. Sally Rooney ate with this one. Her quotes. I'm thinking about some of them right now. This was an amazing book. This hit me harder than I expected it to. I didn't have super high expectations going into this book, but it was perfect. I do not have complaints about this book. Please read it. It's so good. Next is Just Six Numbers by Martin Rees. This was a nonfiction book that I recently read. I liked it. It was good information, but honestly, I'm gonna put it under would recommend, but not a favorite. I just feel like I could have got this information from some other format. I didn't need to read it in a book like this. And maybe it would have hit if I actually read it physically. I did listen to it as an audiobook. Next is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Okay, this was really disappointing. I had such high expectations for this book. I'm putting this under would recommend, but not a favorite. I wish that I could say that I'm glad I read this, but I kind of felt disappointed by it, and I'm still trying to decide if I'm going to read Hellbent. Next is God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I think about this book a lot. I will say it's one of my top reads of the year, but it wasn't a 5-star read for me. I had a really good time reading this, and I think that it deserves the praise that it has received. I am very glad that I read this. Next is Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. This is the second book in the Red Rising trilogy, but then there's a whole Red Rising universe, I believe. I'm glad that I read this. Honestly, I don't remember a ton from it. I read it pretty early in the year, and I still need to read the last book, so I might need a refresher on this book. But overall, I do remember enjoying it, and I'm glad that I read it. Next is Funny Story by Emily Henry. This was her 2024 release. It wasn't a favorite of mine. Like, Happy Place sits higher to me, but I liked this book a lot. I'm glad that I read it, and I think that Miles was a wonderful main character, or male main character. Oh, Emma by Jane Austen. This is going under Swoon, guys. This book is so... It makes my heart happy. I'm really glad that I read this. Definitely one of my favorite classics. I think this might be one of my favorite Jane Austens so far, but I still have a few that I need to read. It's a swoon for me. Next is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I'm just gonna go ahead and put this under would recommend, but not a favorite. It was a pretty good read to me, but it's not gonna stick with me. I still need to watch the movie. I think that I will enjoy that more, but I think that people who really like Studio Ghibli would like this book. Ooh, Down the Drain by Julia Fox. This is a memoir by Julia Fox. This is going in swoon. I think that Julia Fox she's amazing, guys. You should read this memoir. You don't have to know anything about her, but her life was crazy. And I really appreciate her being so raw and authentic in this book. Definitely my favorite memoir I've ever read. And I love this book. Now we have Matthew Perry's memoir, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. I am glad that I read this. I learned a lot about Matthew Perry, and I also felt like he was very authentic. I commend him putting that information on pages for the public to see. Next is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. Kindly wipe it from my memory. I did not like this book. It was okay in the beginning. The middle was a snooze fest. I thought it was so boring. And the end, it was lackluster. I didn't really get a lot out of this book. Kindly wipe it from my memory. Ooh, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. I started my year off by reading this mammoth of a book. I'm not only glad that I read this, I swoon when I think about it, and I cannot wait to reread this book one day. I need a bit of a break though, because it is very, very long, but I would love to read that again. I would highly recommend it. Next is Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson, I believe. I am really glad that I read this book. Honestly, a lot of the plot has escaped my mind, but I remember really enjoying it, and I think that if I just read the synopsis again, I would remember everything that happened in this book, and I am glad that I read it. Next is My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkwon Braithwaite. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, I'm so sorry. But this book ate. I'm glad that I read this. This was fun. I would highly, highly recommend this book. Next is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I had an okay time with this one. I'm gonna put it under thanks but no thanks. It wasn't really for me, but I don't want to wipe it from my memory, mostly because I have a signed edition of this book that has my name in it, so I really appreciate that. I love Ali Hazelwood, and it's very disappointing, but I'm giving her another chance. So Ali Hazelwood, love you. Bring back your STEM romances. Those were really good. Next we have Beloved by Toni Morrison. This one goes under swoon. This was one of the best books that I read this year as well. I really, really liked it, and I would love to read more by Toni Morrison. Next is Bunny by Mona Awad. Right away, gonna say glad that I read this. I had a wonderful time. I thought it was so twisty. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew what was going on at the same time. And I think about this book a lot. Next we have Alex Trebek's memoir. I think it's called The Answer Is. I'm so sorry, Alex Trebek. I'm putting this under thanks but no thanks. I did not think this was a very good memoir. I appreciate what he's done in his life, but the layout was weird. I feel like what he really highlighted wasn't super necessary to put in a book, and I will just stick to watching reruns of Jeopardy with Alex. Next we have Aquarium by David Vaughn. This was a reread for me. It was a book that I remember really sticking with me from my childhood, so that's why I went ahead and reread it. I'm gonna put it under glad that I read this. It was a good time. Next is A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. This is a Hades and Persephone love story romance. Putting this under would recommend, but not a favorite. I did enjoy it. I just don't think about it a lot, and it was a little too spicy for me. I'm not a big fan of that. Next is Roundabout by Fong Nguyen. This is the book that has absolutely no occurrences of the letter E, and I found it from Book Talk. I'm glad that I read this. Initially, I rated it a 5-star, but I have lowered it since then because I didn't care about the story, like, at all. I just thought it was really impressive that the author was able to write an entire book without using the letter E, but overall, I am glad that I read it. 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. This book I had some issues with, but overall, I had an amazing time reading it, and I felt so accomplished when I finished it. It doesn't go in glad I read this, it goes in swoon, because when I think about this book, I just get good memories from my time reading it, and I was always hooked. I was sat, I was ready to find out what was going to happen next, and I love when a book does that for me. Ooh, next we have Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I don't even have to think about this. Put it up here. This lives in my head rent-free. Probably one of my favorite classics ever. Maybe one of my favorite books ever. I think about this book so much. I think about the movie so much. I think about all the characters all the time. Please read this book if you're willing to go on an emotional roller coaster and take on a big long story about some wild and wacky Russians. But this is such a good book. Next is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This is her memoir. Honestly, she ate. I love this book. I'm gonna put it under swoon because I remember everything that she talked about in this book. I thought it was amazing and I respect her so much. Wow, I've read a lot of memoirs this year. My last 2 books on here are both memoirs. First we have The House of Hidden Meanings by RuPaul. Putting this under glad I read this. I didn't know anything about RuPaul before, but I thought that it was good. I thought it was well written. And then finally we have Jimmy Carter's memoir, Reflections on My Life, I think it was called. I'm so sorry, Jimmy Carter. Rest in peace. But it's going under thanks but no thanks. I did not like this memoir. It wasn't what I was expecting, and I wouldn't recommend it, honestly. I think that he has probably written better books. I wanted to read a book by him, but this one did not hit. That was kind of a sad way to end off the tier ranking, honestly. I don't know if I can zoom out, but guys, here's my rankings. Take a moment to appreciate it. Honestly, the kindly wipe it from my memory ones, these can just go away. These can hide at the bottom. Just look at these ones. Thanks so much for watching to the end of this video. I had a lot of fun doing this. I hope that it gave a pretty good idea of all the books that I read in 2024. I felt like it was important to do because I started my YouTube channel towards the end of the year, so a lot of these books you guys had never heard me talk about. And I thought it was a really good refresher for me. And overall, I had a really good reading year, as you can see. Most of the books are glad I read this and above. So I'm looking forward to more videos in 2025, looking forward to all the amazing books that I have planned to read, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!